Congratulations, Nasia, on winning the 2023 Queen Mary Prize from the Wasafiri magazine. How do you feel?
Yeah, it still feels a little bit surreal, to be honest. It's a bit wild, isn't it? You just kind of think you sit in your house and you put words on a piece of paper and that somebody will actually read those and make something of them. So no, it feels really good. You know, it's a personal win, but for me, it's more than that. It's a win for all of those people, all of those writers that are always kept in the margins. I think that is such a good feeling, but it's almost like a sense of representing all of us.
When did you realise that you wanted to be a writer?
That's a really interesting one. It's quite a cliched thing, isn't it? Many writers say, oh, I used to write as a child, but I did used to write as a child. I suppose my love for writing came from having two parents. My dad was a poet and my mum was a phenomenal storyteller, and I have so many rich memories of just being nestled between them both and absorbing these stories. So I was a listener before I was a writer, but I have a very clear memory of being about 9, and I wrote a story about a penny, and it was called Penny Takes a Trip or something like that, and it's about a 1 penny coin that drops out someone's pocket and it goes on this long journey. And thinking back about that story, it's quite sort of like cyclic in terms of this penny goes on this long journey, has all these adventures, good and bad, and eventually comes back to where it began. So definitely from childhood there was an impulse there from a very young age.
Is there any geographical location to this penny? I mean, I know that you grew up in Manchester, in sort of, the geographical north of England.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was around Manchester. It went down drain pipes and it went down to the Irwell River. It got washed up in places, got picked up and then exchanged in a shop. So it was very much in that sort of northern kind of atmosphere.
I wonder if you would like to tell me about the story behind your Poetry Wales poem published earlier in the partition-themed edition of the magazine.
Yeah, that poem, and this is something I've been reflecting on since winning the prize actually. That poem is very much about my family, my parents, about their experience of migration, but also the idea how colonization can haunt you throughout generations. And I find that my writing keeps returning to that theme. My writing always returns to my parents' journey. It's very much about the things that your parents leave behind for you and the missing pieces where you're trying to piece the story together, but also trying to work out what their traumas were, what they carried across continents.
I wanted to ask a related question to the partition story. Obviously you write poetry and fiction, and I wonder if if the partition narrative kind of fits one genre or the other better, or kind of, well, for you anyway, or do you think it's sort of, you have different versions of it to tell in different forms?
Yeah, I think for me, probably it's prose rather than poetry. I think also it's kind of there's kind of a fine line in my writing in between whether it's prose or whether it's poetry. It lends itself to both themes. In terms of expressing what I want to express and the story that I want to tell, it has to be the long form.
You've just finished co-editing Gathering, Women of Colour on Nature with Durraish Shara. If you would please tell me a little bit about the background to this, what I feel to be as a very important collection of writings.
Sure. So Doré was doing a residency, nature related, and she tells me that she came out of that with more questions than answers. And you know, when that happens, you realise there's more work to be done. So between us, we had lots of long, meaningful conversations, and where that writing could go, and this idea of bringing together lots of other women of colour who probably felt the same way, had something to say about their place in nature, their interactions in nature, how nature has, or nature writing, nature itself has been colonised. And so this idea of gathering was born. The title itself really lends to the concept. It feels like a gathering of women of colour coming together and sharing their experiences on the page.
And you've always been a very passionate supporter of women of colour, but sort of women in general. And I think I got to know you more as the facilitator when we first met, when you were running, I think, a Literature Wales funded creative writing course with Taylor Edmonds, where I came to first. And that was, I think, in early 2020. I wanted to ask you about kind of your experience of working with sort of women of colour who haven't had any experience of writing, and then suddenly they come to a session and they realise that maybe there's an avenue open to them as a writer.
Yeah, so I've done quite a few sessions in facilitating community writing workshops, and I feel quite passionate about that. I feel that that's where the real, I suppose, sharing of knowledge happens, and it's a space to empower women to tell their stories. So I've got a long-standing relationship with a group of women called the Aurora Trinity Collective. They're all women of colour, come from various backgrounds, and they're in Cardiff. We all end up in Cardiff for various different reasons. And Taylor and I ran a nature writing course with them, and a lot of the women had no experience of writing before. And we did oral storytelling. We encouraged them to write in whatever language came to them. If they didn't feel they could pen words, to draw, to do a collage. And we found that there was so much engagement. And from that grew our Long View project, which was funded by Natural Resource Wales in collaboration with Literature Wales. Taylor and I work with the same group of women, and I think we've built up this wonderful, wonderful relationship, and I have seen how these ladies have blossomed in terms of their writing. They're very passionate about it. It's just great to see people feeling that there is a space for them, and to be able to facilitate that and to hold that space for them to come together and to be able to talk about sometimes really, really moving accounts, which I found we're talking about nature, but actually we're travelling the globe, and we're talking about really special family traditions, heritage, travels of tales of migration, all those things.
So just talking about sort of you as a workshop leader, I think you've recently done some work at Teen Newydd. I just wondered how that came about and what was the content of that. Yeah,
so I did a week-long, led a week-long course that I designed called Notes on Nature. I was fortunate enough to have the wonderful Noreen Masood, the writer of A Flat Place, who came in, and she facilitated a couple of workshops. And this was specifically for women of colour. It was a remarkable experience. We had such a mix of women, some with lots of writing experience. We had a filmmaker, we had an oral storyteller, and we came together in Teen Newydd in this lovely space, and we were fed and looked after and just basically left to it. We found so many common threads when we were doing the nature writing, the conversations we were having, you know, on ecofeminism and colonization, which is something that kept coming up over and over again, and the echoes of it and how it still haunts us. We felt like we started this week as complete strangers, but by the end of it, you know, we felt very close, because I think when women of colour get together and they share those experiences without having to give any subtext, there's just this constant understanding of, you know, and head nodding and yes, I get where you're coming from. I may have been leading the course, but my God, no, they definitely led it, and they gave so much as well. It was wonderful, really enriching.
You're obviously a working lawyer. I know your links with Shelter Cymru, and you are also working on a first novel, which I believe is part of your PhD research at Swansea University. I'd like to ask you about, you know, how you find the time to kind of combine sort of, you know, a career in law, motherhood, and also writing. And sort of, from what I know of the novel, it's an intriguing subject matter.
Yeah, I just feel like all life is writing, isn't it? Your working life, my identity as a mother, my children often crop up in my writing. You know, doing law, you know, I've often been asked, well, that's quite a jump from law to writing. It's actually not. Throughout my legal career, you know, I've been creating a narrative. I will see a client, they will tell me their problems, their legal issues, and that's listening to their story. They are storytelling and I'm listening, and then it's my job to mould that into a narrative, to present that as a narrative. In court, you go to court and you're presenting a narrative in the strongest form possible. It's, you know, it's all writing. So for me, it all just kind of blends into one. I'm very, very passionate about the work that I do with Shelter Cymru. I have been a social welfare lawyer for many, many years from the start of my legal career, and that's where my heart has always been, to, you know, to be able to help people, but also to help people to feel empowered. And there's nothing more satisfying when your client has got the capacity then to be able to, you know, advocate for themselves. My work at Shelter Cymru, you know, I'm really proud to be part of that organisation. It's a charity that does amazing work, and I actually work as a legal editor for them. So I've kind of stepped away for now, from attending court. So me and my colleague, we do all the legal content. So I'm constantly writing. Again, it's narratives and writing things in ways that people understand. So in my PhD, I think it's that sense of kind of research. I love research and I love answering questions. I love to have a problem and then I like to solve a problem, which is quite similar to law in a way. So my PhD, I started it just before COVID hit, which is kind of a, you know, unfortunate time. I was really lucky that I was granted a scholarship by Swansea University, and that made it possible for me to sort of do the PhD. After I had finished my MA, I was left with lots of questions, and one of the questions was, what impact did colonisation and post-colonisation have on the mother and daughter relationship for Pakistani women? And as far as I could see, there was nothing written about that in any depth. There's lots of writings about mothers and daughters from sort of the Western lens. I being Pakistani myself, family migrated from Pakistan, I thought it was really relevant. I had this, when my mum died, I was left with this archive of material, family material. And, you know, from all, myself, my siblings, I became the whole, you know, the caretaker of this archive. Accidentally, I don't know. Or maybe it does go back to that idea of my parents embedding this real sort of love for storytelling and honouring things, honouring our history, honouring lives, honouring the voices that get subjugated. And so my PhD research is actually on colonisation, post-colonialism, and memory and how that intersects with gender and migration. And I use my family archive as a starting point. So there's material sort of memory, there's photographs. My father was a photographer as well, so I've got stacks of photos. And I use those as jumping off points to not only speak about my family's story, but also to speak about the greater sort of impact of colonisation within Pakistan and India. There are gaps, there are absolute massive gaps in my family story that I can never ask my parents because they're no longer here. And I think that's where the imagination comes to work, and querying what those gaps actually tell me and what they don't tell me.
I know how passionate you are about this concept of decolonisation, and you've done a fair bit of work on this. I think there's some film work as well as some writing coming up. I wonder if you'd like to tell me a little bit more about that aspect of you.
Yeah, I think for me, decolonisation is such a massive concept, and the question is, do we ever decolonise until we break down all those structures? I feel like I can sort of squirrel away and do my bit, and maybe it will have some impact. So for me, it very much begins with material memory and objects, and how objects have been silenced and how objects can speak. I quite like to give voice to objects that, for example, the objects that are in Powys Castle, and lots of that is loot from India. However you frame it, that's what it is. So I've done some research on those objects and I've written about them, which actually form part of my Wasafiri Prize. I'm currently working on an arts project to do with, and I say the inverted commas, decolonising certain art spaces. So it's an ongoing process, and it's ongoing work, and it will continue for many years with more and more voices are heard about this aspect.
I also want to ask you something else about this, which is the aspect of you that fascinates me, and that's your love of language and actually wanting to innovate language. And I'm referring to a specific conversation we had, I think it must have been a couple of months ago, or no, actually last month at Catherine Stansfield's house, and you were talking to the writer Sarah Pershon about creating words, and I can't remember the exact word that you invented with your daughter.
Oh, I don't know whether it was with my daughter, but I was talking about my contribution to sort of knowledge in the sort of like, academia sphere. And I started thinking about loss and how, when a child loses both parents, they're called orphans. A woman loses a husband, she's a widow. When a parent loses a child, there's no word for that. My own mother lost a son, there was no word for her. And then I started thinking about this idea of like the mother and daughter, which goes back to my theme of my PhD, and there's no word for that, really, that relationship, which is written about quite a lot, but there's no specific word for it. So I put together a word, and it's instead of familial, it's a familial, as in the female, familial sort of relationship. And actually the working title for my PhD at the moment is familial cartography.
I wanted to ask you about the poets and writers you like to read, but I also kind of want to weave in this element of you've introduced me to a lot of South Asian writing and South Asian writers, and is there anybody up and coming that we should know about from the diaspora?
Yeah, it's quite exciting at the moment, the sort of Welsh poetry scene in terms of the diaspora. We had South Asian Heritage Month in August. That was hosted at Chapter, and there were readings. I read Hamad, Dore. There was a particular young poet who was there. She's of Nepalese heritage and Swansea-based, and she's I think she's in her early 20s, Raha. You can find her on Instagram, Encapsulated Emotions. And I've been enjoying her work quite a lot, yeah. It's, it's exciting what's happening in Wales.
Great. So in terms of your reading interest, who do you like to read? And maybe when I say read, I'm talking about pleasure reading, but also research in terms of your own, own work.
I think pleasure reading's kind of gone out the window since I've been doing the PhD, but when I do get moments, Ocean Wong is, who doesn't love his work? It's beautiful, emotive, it gets me right in my heart. In research, actually Anchal Malhotra, who was the judge for the prize, her work, I started reading it before I started my PhD, and her work has been so influential in terms of my research on material memory, on partition, on storytelling about those really, really difficult things. Thoroughly enjoy her work. I've been reading lots of poetry. I did have some here now. What's he called? Zafar Kanal?
Oh yes,
yes, his poetry actually reminds a lot of your work. It's stunning poetry.
He was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize this year. Right.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying his work recently. And of course, if you haven't read it, read Nouri Masood's book, Flat Place. It's beautifully written, it's personal, but it's objective about the idea of speaking about those really difficult things and not, and she tackles the subject of talking about a very difficult story in such in such a caring way. There's always that issue when you're a writer of colour. How do you talk about your histories, your stories, without it becoming consumed by the white gaze? How do you ensure that you're telling the story with dignity? And she does it beautifully. So I'd really recommend her book.
And finally, you are the first person from Wales to win the Wasafiri Prize. I'm just sort of wondering, if you've had enough time to digest and process, the impact of kind of winning such a major prize, and where your writing might be going as a result of this accolade.
Yeah, I think Taz, it's, as I say, I was so stunned by it, by the win initially, and it's when I came back home and my university, they started emailing, and I had lots of congratulations, and I kind of realised what it really means for us writers in Wales. It's a really important thing because we are, I often feel that in terms of the publishing world, the noise is all about sort of England and Wales has got their own sort of thing going on, and nobody kind of pays much attention in a way. I don't know if you feel the same, but it's, we've got our own publishing going on and we've got our own things going on.
Absolutely.
So I think I don't want to attach such significance or importance to myself, but if it puts Wales on the map, then that's great. And if it helps to elevate my writing, and one thing it has done is it's given me great confidence in what I write, because I'm forever in doubt, and that's okay, because I don't want to be one of those writers who puts things down on page and thinks, oh well, I'm brilliant. And in fact, a conversation with my PhD supervisor Jasmine Donaghy, and she sort of messaged me and said, I hope this now gives you confidence in yourself, which is lovely of her to say. So yes, I think it will help me to sort of believe in my writing, but also believe that people want to hear the story that I want to tell, and it's relatable. I think that's the important thing.
Thank you very much, Nasia. We're all looking forward to what you are going to be bringing to us next in terms of whether your poetry, prose or novel. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.